I'm really excited to be here. This is probably the first time that I've had to work on something to really review everything about what Marina Pando Social Justice Research Collaborative is and why it began. I've only done much shorter presentations, and a lot of it is driven by my experience, what I know, what I've learned in the university, but also what I learned as a high school organizer, right? So I'll go ahead and get started. So first I wanted to start with my thank yous. I think my first note of gratitude is definitely to my elders who survived the genocide in Guatemala. There was a civil war there that led to kind of the targeting and violence against indigenous people. So I always recognize that while my ancestors may not have been perfect people, their struggles, their survival, their resilience continue to allow me to be here in front of you all. The choices that they made, the limitations that they faced, and a lot of times the burdens that they carried, I know are part of what has allowed me to be here. In addition to those who have passed away, there's also the people who crossed multiple borders, myself included, to be able to search for what a lot of people want, which is basic survival, right? I also want to thank my family. These are my two daughters. That's my partner. Some of you might know him, it's Mark. And I'm really grateful to them because part of what I understand is that, or what I've experienced is that a lot of times as a mother, you're asked not to bring that part of your life into your work, right? At home, you're a mother. At work, it's whatever you do. And don't let those two spaces overlap, right? So for me, I really challenge that because I think part of what has made me be that much stronger and more adamant in my quest for social justice is the reality that I'm building a better world, not just for my children, but for their children and for their community, right? So raising my daughters in community, in social justice movements, is directly part of why I do this work. And I'm very grateful to all their patience with me. I also want to thank East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice for giving us the space and the opportunity to do this program. And I'll talk more about the relationship because they're absolutely a critical part of the collaborative. And it's also a big part of what I'll be talking about today is kind of breaking down divisions. So I don't think of this as their East Yard, I'm the scholar, because that's not the case. I've been a member of East Yard for about 4 years now. I live in the areas where they organize. I participate in a lot of different ways. And so I finally wanted to do something where I could bring my passion for working with first-generation students of color in particular, together with the work that East Yards was doing. I also want to take a moment to recognize Marina Pando, who is actually the person that this program is named after. She's an elder in our movement. She passed away last year, about a couple weeks before we started the program. So when the program started, we were just the Social Justice Research Collaborative. But in light of her passing, we decided to really honor her work and her legacy by naming this program after her, right? The building of future scholars in honor of our elders. And so I wanted to share, this was a blog that was written by Hugo Luján, who's an organizer with East Yard and who knew Marina really well. So it says, to many, she was Doña Marina. To me, she was a fighter for women's and workers' rights, a fighter for the life of her community, an artist with her many jokes, amazing storyteller. She was La Mil Usos. To me, she was La Leona, or the lion. She left me with this last conversation 2 weeks prior to her passing. I asked her, Marina, if you pass away, she was going under surgery. Marina, if you pass away, is there something you would like to tell your friends or family? And she said, well, yes. To my daughter, Idalia, I don't know what I did to deserve a daughter like you. Thank you very much for taking care of me and everything you've done for me. I know that it's going to hurt you once I leave, but I want you to know that I love you. My grandchildren, take care of your mother, and I love you. And to all my friends, do not live life like idiots. Live it always. That's Marina. And the actual quote is, no sean pendejos. So do not live life like idiots. Live it always to its fullest potential. And so we always honor Marina by both including this blog in every publication that we do, but also by always reminding people that this is who it's named after, right? She was an elder in the movement, and her spirit, that fighting spirit, continues to guide our work and continues to push us forward. I also want to recognize the Tongva people of Los Angeles. They're the indigenous people here, right? We all have to recognize that we couldn't be here today if it wasn't for the violent dispossession of indigenous people. And they continue to fight for their community rights. They continue to fight for their sovereignty. They're not federally recognized, but they definitely still exist. They're still here, they're still organizing, and they're still keeping Mother Earth for us. And so when I think about environmental justice, it's not just about pollution. It's really about trying to honor the fact that indigenous people are the best earth keepers that we have, and we have to follow their example, their appreciation for Mother Earth. So this is in Pavagna. It's actually a sand map that they did recently. I also want to thank the committee for organizing this. I can only imagine how much work it took. But I also want to thank you because in allowing me to be here and in inviting me to be here, you're centering the experiences of women of color. Women of color as scholars, women of color as community leaders, and I really appreciate that. And I want to just make a really quick note about the difference between environmentalism and environmental justice. I think, how many of you feel like you understand the difference? Okay. So I teach a EJ class, environmental justice class at Cal State LA. So I've been talking about this for the last few weeks. So environmentalism, the way we understand it, is typically led by white affluent men. Historically, that's who has been at the lead of it. You can think about the conservation of national parks. You could think about campaigns or agendas to kind of protect wildlife and animals. Those are kind of mainstream environmental projects and histories. You can also think about, they typically call themselves like Big Green or the Green 10 or the Big 10, I think it was. So we're thinking about like Sierra Club, Audubon Society, really major organizations. But part of the issue with some of those organizations is that they often don't address the issues that people of color face in terms of the urban environment, right? So I wanted to bring, this is the Cal Enviro screen. I don't know if folks are familiar with it, but it's something that's very, I think depending on grade level, it's something you could use in your class. I recommend you go and check it out. I can also share curriculum because we just used this in my class and we had a whole assignment, a whole lab around it. But basically what the Cal Enviro screen does is it takes certain population characteristics and then pollution burdens, and it kind of puts that data together for us. And part of what it demonstrates is that if you look along these areas, right, and who typically lives in Santa Monica, Redondo Beach, these parts of Long Beach, Huntington Beach, right? Those areas are typically, the residents there are typically white, they're typically college educated, they're typically middle to upper class, and they own property, right? And so these are all markers of race and class. Now, if you look at the red areas, they're the ones that have the highest burden pollution, and those areas are, we're talking about the inner city, right, which is a lot of communities of color. We're talking about places like West Side Long Beach, South Central, East LA, now of course all the way going out to places like Pomona, Riverside, the Inland Empire, right, which are, so you can also like trace communities of color by how much pollution there is, right? And so part of what environmental justice argues is that low-income communities of color are disproportionately impacted by environmental pollution. That means we're more likely to live by freeways, we're more likely to live by rail yards, we're statistically more likely to live by industries that work with heavy metals. And because of that, the health disparity is really huge. I remember one of the campaigns that Communities for a Better Environment was fighting a few years ago was a Vernon power plant. So they wanted to put this massive power plant in Vernon. All the cities that surround Vernon are low-income communities of color. And they actually acknowledged that an average of 13 people a year were going to die due to the pollution of that power plant. But you had big money behind it. But communities organized over years, and they were able to defeat it. So that's the difference between environmental justice and environmentalism. We're not just concerned about polar bears or penguins, because even though those are really important issues, our lives are important too, right? Our health is also important. And the whole idea is no one's gonna come to save us, because organizations like Sierra Club have, more recently they've tried to change, but have historically not felt that these issues mattered. Like they surveyed their their members, the people who pay membership fees, and the majority thought that the issues around environmental pollution in urban cities weren't a priority for them, right? So then this is where we have the emergence of environmental justice. So now I want to talk about the Marina Pando program. So one of the things that led to the emergence of the Marina Pando program is this division between the community and the university, right? So a lot of times, we know that experiencing a higher education, you're often asked to distance yourself from the community that you're from. For a lot of working class people, the idea is you get an education so that you can get out of the hood or the barrio, right? It allows you to get to new opportunities. And so kind of seeing that even up to the extent of graduate school, right, in my own training, and really feeling like that's not remotely what I was about, right? Like I'm not trying to leave my community. I'm trying to fight to make my community better, to make it healthier, and to make it more powerful. And so one of the things that I really wanted to challenge with this program was this division between who is the community and who is the university. Because a lot of times when you have like collaborative research, you get a scholar from the university who comes into the community and is like, I'll help you. You know, like we can do this research together. But for me, I was like, I'm from the community. Like I live there, I grew up there, I'm from the community. And no amount of degrees is gonna tell me that I should primarily identify with the university, right? So kind of trying to break that division down was part of what informed Marina Pando. There was also, it was really important for me to question who gets to be an expert and who gets to define what type of expert you are. One of the things that emerged more recently is that scholars kind of position community members as community experts, and it's actually supposed to be a good thing because you're recognizing kind of the local epistemologies, the fact that the people who reside in an area are the experts of that area. They can tell you what the community life is like, what the community needs are like. And so in that way it is good, but then I also felt like, again, it's creating this division where the assumption is that the technical expert, the person who has the science, the theory, and the research ability is the academic, is the university person, right? And then the community experts, the assumption is that nobody in the community is also a college graduate capable of doing research. And so I wanted to break that down. This is a quote from Mark. It's also in the program. So the Marina Pando Social Justice Research Collaborative represents an intentional effort to build a community institution that supports the development of community technical experts. We recognize that in order to sustain a movement that can operate at a high level, we need technical experts who are grounded in our communities because they are of our communities. In addition to that, we always have this hashtag, first gen problems, right? And so part of it is understanding who first generation students are because those are the students in our communities. Those are the members of Eastyard, right? They're typically first gen students. So within 6 years of starting higher education, first-gen low-income students, 10.9% complete a BA, 26.1 complete, sorry for the typo, an AA, 16.1 are still enrolled, meaning it's taking them longer than 6 years to complete their BA, and 46.8 dropped out. So we already know that the numbers of people who start the university pathway are already low. We know that the numbers of people who graduate from high school are already low. Right? So then if you include the fact that half of them, about half of them, are going to drop out of the college pathway, then there's some real serious institutional issues, right? And so this is part of what we also try to take into account in the program. We also know that unpaid internships reproduce inequality for low-income students of color, right? There's some more work being done around this because the reality is that if you're having to help your family out, if you're having to be the one to buy all your books, if you don't get enough financial aid to cover all of the expenses of going to college, including the cost of living, right? Paying rent, buying food, paying for your transportation if you're a commuter, then the likelihood that you're gonna take an unpaid internship is very small. And it's really unfair to even expect students to get experience through unpaid internships, college students in particular. So we wanted to start a program where it's like, can we fund students for the summer to come back and do research with the organization that they're already a part of on the issues that they've already decided matters to them. And then we also want to go beyond representation, right? Like college prep and grad school prep programs do important work, but they often measure their success based on how many people get into the pipeline. And that's not how we measure our success. We measure our success based on how many people get to do social justice research. So it's not just about you getting a degree and continuing your career pathway. It's about you being able to connect those skills that you now have to the community work. Does that make sense? Yeah? So these were all some of the motivating factors. So just to review, right? We want to break down this division between the community and the university because they're not always two separate things. We want to build technical experts of the community. We want to address first-gen problems, and we want to go beyond representation and diversity. So let's talk about the people involved. The people involved in making this program possible are the East Yard staff, some of whom are pictured there. The staff is relatively small. I think it's something like 8 people on staff total. There's also program staff, so we're kind of temporary staff that works for ECR just to run this program. And that's usually me and one other person. And I'll talk about it more later, but last summer we did it completely for free. In part because it was a pilot program, we weren't sure how it was going to work out, but also because this is, for us, I think part of what offsets some of what we're learning at the university, which is that we should distance ourselves from community, that our education, our dissertation should always come first. But the reality is that for us, staying grounded in community work is also a big part of us being able to finish these like academic projects. So there's program staff, but it's very small, just 2 of us. There's researchers and research assistants. This division, it kind of depends on the people themselves. So researchers are typically undergrads or recent graduates. So people who went away to college, did their degree, came back, and were kind of like, I'm not quite sure what to do next. So we kind of try to step in and say, well, you know, consider doing research. You have the skills that you need already. Research assistants are typically high school students or college undergrads. So college undergrad students can fit in either. It just depends for them how comfortable they feel. How comfortable they feel with the organization, with the issues, and with their own academic abilities. So we allow them to like figure that out for themselves. So researchers are from community college students to recent graduates. So we have like ELAC students, UCLA graduates, all kind of working in the same capacity. This was our group last year, and then this is our group this year. So it grew a lot. We're exclusively first gen, and I mean from the research assistants to the East Yard staff. Everybody on that staff, everybody in our program have been first generation students. We're also actually residents of the impacted areas. At least for this one, we are. Here we had Oscar, who he's actually one of the big reasons I started the program, was because he was saying that at San Francisco State, where he was doing his degree, there weren't any research programs for first generation students of color. So I was like, that's really messed up, because it's a skill set that allows you to take a next step. You already know that you want to be part of producing knowledge, you just don't have the institutional support to learn how to do that. And so from that position, it can be really intimidating to apply to grad school, right? So I was like, well, let's structure this program that'll teach you how to do research and build on the skills you already have. So right now he lives in San Francisco, but he is also from, he's also a resident of the impacted areas. And when I say impacted areas, I mean the geographic areas that ECR does work in, right? So the areas that are disproportionately burdened by toxic pollution. We all live in those areas, and as a result, we all live with the everyday realities of those issues, right? So my own daughters have a lot of breathing problems. I definitely know it's because we live like 3 blocks away from the rail line, right? I don't know if Oscar considers himself an East Yard member, so that's why I put almost everyone. But everyone else is an East Yard member. And that ranges from a few months I think some of the research assistants in this cohort, they had only been with East Yard for a couple months, but some of us have been there for years. And some of the students who are now college students who are doing this program, they started being members of East Yard as high school students, because East Yard goes into the local high school and organizes students there. So they started in the high school club. Now they're college students, and we're inviting them to stay connected, right? We're inviting them back so that they can see how their skills apply to the stuff that they were already working on. Researchers are undergrads and recent grads, and then research assistants are high school students and undergrads. We're also still working out how to build kind of like a program pipeline. So in 2015, for example, Jocelyn, who's this person, she was a research assistant. It was right after her first year at UCLA, so she was kind of like, I don't think I can do a whole research project. So we said, okay, why don't you just support some of the other projects? And then in 2016, she actually was one of the researchers, right? So we're hoping that as high school students also get to know the program more, get to understand what research is, that they might want to move into different positions. We also had Jessica, who was a researcher in 2015, kind of step in as a co-facilitator for 2016. So what is the program itself? We try our best to run it as an 8-week program. This year it got a little bit out of hand. It became a 10-week program. But part of why we try to do 8 weeks is because we want to kind of fit it in between. Some people go to semester schools, some people go to quarter schools. So we kind of want to fit it right in between those two like summer break periods. But the program consists of a 1-week intensive training. So that is like 36 hours that week. We expect students to show up. And that's where we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what the curriculum is. So we begin from kind of politicizing what knowledge production is, you know, like who created the university system, who continues to benefit the most from the university system, who gets to be an expert, and how do our communities also hold knowledge? How have we been scholars, right? Because we do talk about like, it's only through colonization that we were no longer considered to be knowledgeable people, right? But we also come from the people who like had advancements in astronomy and agriculture. Those are our legacies, right? And we just need to reclaim them. And we also honor the knowledge of their families. Like, okay, maybe they didn't go to high school, but I bet they knew how to like make a living and figure things out so that you could go to college, right? And we try to honor those struggles. But then we also cover things like procrastination, or you know, or like how do you keep yourself accountable to writing? You know, I definitely have felt like both in my experience and in conversations with other first-gen like PhD students, there's a huge struggle around the fact that a lot of times we went to K through 12 institutions that were under-resourced, that were over-policed, and we don't always have the best relationships to school. That's just real. And so we try to like acknowledge that and say like, we need to kind of rework that relationship. We need to reclaim the power that was taken away from our community, right? And so it's a very multifaceted program. And then we do 6 weeks of research. So during those 6 weeks, and actually, let me see. Okay, I can go over it more. So there's a 1-week training, 6 weeks of research. Then we do a community presentation, and then we have students write full reports. So this is some of what the training looks like. This is probably our first day where we're talking about like, what does it mean to produce knowledge? This is an activity that USC came and did with us. They allowed us to borrow these machines that actually track particulate matter. And so we actually went out. We have it at the East Yard office, which is in the City of Commerce. So we actually just went out on the block and kind of saw how the machine worked. And then thought about like, okay, the machine only gives you numbers. What those numbers mean is up to us. We built the story around those numbers, right? So kind of getting them to think about that. We had some faculty come in and talk to us, and then also doing stuff around like redefining our relationship to writing, right? So I had students talk about why does it matter for us to be writers? So those are some of the pictures from the training. Then for 5 weeks, students go out and do the research. A lot of this work is very independent, in part because, and this is part of the first-gen struggle, almost everyone is taking classes and working other jobs. I think we had one student who wasn't, 1 out of 8. And so we allow them to be flexible in their schedules. We keep them accountable through weekly meetings. So every week we meet with each of the projects, and we go over like, what did you accomplish this past week? How are you doing on your timeline? What are some of the issues that you're coming across? What do you need for the next week? So the collaboration with East Yard is really important here because it's not just the program staff who are there, it's the community, it's the organization staff who are also there. So for instance, if we look at, this was a 2015 project, and it was about brownfields, right? So brownfields are any kind of unused, abandoned lot that is either polluted or could potentially be polluted, right? So one of the projects wanted to identify how many brownfields exist in proximity to, they call them like sensitive receptor areas. So any places where children are, where residential areas. And so what the researcher asked the organization to do was actually mobilize a few people to go on bike rides. And so they rode their bikes across the community, and every time they saw something that was a brownfield, they stopped, they took a picture, they noted any signs, they noted what it looked like, and that begins to build a database, right? And so then one of the findings from that year was that while EPA only documents 2 brownfields in the city of Commerce, there's actually over 20, right? So there's a huge discrepancy, and that's part of the issue with environmental racism. There's a huge discrepancy in the data that exists. So we were like, well, people have bikes, they know their area, you know, and they were able to organize that. This is one of the other teams from this year. And so what they did is, along with the research assistants, they went out and collected different soil samples along the LA riverbed. And so this is them testing those soil samples to see what heavy metals exist in the soil along there. This project was trying to track the oil pipelines in West Long Beach. So they were going out to look at the different things that were marked, but also trying to find the things that weren't marked, and trying to see if there were pipelines that actually ran through residential areas, so in the backyards of actual people. And then I like this picture because Julius looks so stressed out. And I think in a way that is kind of how it feels towards the end, right? So this is the community presentation prep. So we have all the students, one of the requirements of the program is that they present. And so we tell them to invite their families. We also invite funders, donors, allies, other academics, agency people. We invite, it's like an open community presentation. So this is them kind of all working together, each of them on their community presentation. And for the workshop, we actually have all the posters that each of the groups did. So if people want to learn more about the projects that they did. So these are some of the pictures from this year's community prep. These are some of the research assistants. So what we did is we had it divided into 4 different stations, and then people just kind of rotated along each station and got to hear every single person present. We also did it this way because part of my intention was it can be extremely intimidating to stand up in front of 60, 80 people and present your research. But our hope was if it's a much smaller group, maybe it won't be so intimidating. And that's a big motivating principle, because we don't want this to be a stressful event for the students. We don't want this to be a negative event. We want them to feel supported and empowered while producing knowledge. So last year we went from being solely donor-based, and what that really means, and we're not talking about big donors, we're talking, let me reach out to my network and ask them to make donations. And I think my mom was one of the biggest donors. She donated like $100. So people donated whatever they could. We've gotten donations as small as $700 and as big as like $150. And our budget priorities were always to fund the students. So the program staff did it for free. And then we were able to provide stipends for the student researchers. And this year we were much better funded. We got a grant through the California EPA. So we were able to expand the program from 3 researchers to 8 researchers, 1 research assistant to 6 research assistants. And all of them got stipends, including the high school students. But we're also very conscious that we're going to continue to do this work whether we have grant funding or not. It might be a challenge, but we're up for that challenge. And then I just wanted to share an example of kind of what a research project looked like. So this is Suzette and Andrea's project. It was called Get the Lead Out. So they developed this question around how can we kind of clean up lead pollution in our community, considering that Exide, which is one of the companies that had been polluting on the east side for decades, was just recently shut down, and so now there's a lot going on in terms of the cleanup. But one of the problems is that the cleanup isn't going to start till next year, and in the meantime, people are concerned about growing food, right? Which is extremely unjust, given that these places are already food deserts, right? Or we call it food apartheid. And so so the research question is really based out of a campaign priority for East Yard, but it's also something that they're interested in. They both participate in a gardening program with East Yard. They've both been active in concerns around Exide. Suzette was a researcher last year, so this is also building on her research. So they did, along with the research assistants, they did 30+ phone surveys about 2 community members, kind of asking how they feel about lead contamination, whether they continue to grow in their garden, how they're growing, what they're growing. And then they went and took soil samples, and they checked it for both pH, but also heavy metals, in particular lead. So one of the things that they found was that bioremediation is bioremediation is the use of plants to kind of remove lead from the soil. So they found that it's a relatively affordable process, one that people can start already, right? But there does need to be more like awareness around the fact that you can't eat those plants, right? And so 2 of the people who were there were actually from the government agency that's supposed to be helping us with this cleanup process. And so they both said they would bring it up as a potential, another solution to cleaning up the soil, right? And so this kind of shows like it is informed by the East Yard organization. It's also informed by their interests. Suzette, for instance, is a dietitian. So a lot of her work was around what can people also eat to kind of make sure that their bodies are not absorbing lead. And then Andrea, she's a community college student who's looking into going into environmental science. I think this program probably did a lot to help her feel like she could do that. So I just wanted to give y'all an overview. So that's the program. So I'm open to questions, literally ask anything. Yeah?
So you said that you found that the EPA says there's 2 brown
Fields,
and you found more than 20. So what happens with that information now? Did you take it to the EPA? Is there any activism component to what you're doing?
Yeah, that's challenging because then it's out of our hands to some extent, because other than documenting and trying to put pressure, if the EPA doesn't want to move on it, they're not going to. So I think at the time when that report was finalized by the student, there was some talk around major like grant funding going to some of the local small cities to change brownfields into like wellness centers or green spaces. But that's still being worked on. A lot of these projects, like even though the research is 8 weeks, the campaigns are years, if not decades. Yeah, I can definitely, oh, that's right. So we have, this is what we produce for a community presentation, and it actually has summaries of all the research projects. And in addition to that, the website has them, the East Yard website, which I can definitely send out. And so we're gonna have some available from this year and from last year, the program reports. Yeah. Any other questions?
Are you ever going to do research questions that maybe are not like science-based, and examples of like some of the research questions that maybe like if you're in humanities that you do with students? Or?
Well, methods-wise, we're pretty open. When we do the training, we definitely don't gear it towards what we think the projects will be, because part of it is like in the future, they could choose completely different research questions and research methods, and so they should have some exposure to that. So we might do like exposure to archival research or oral history research, even though that's not exactly what ends up getting used in this component. I've been thinking a lot about that. This is only our 2nd year, so it's definitely a constant process of reflection. And I think for me, initially I was really open to that. I'm like, they should be able to ask about gender, and some of the projects do ask that. But thinking non-environmental justice related. But then I realized that this is the strength of the organization I collaborate with, and this is part of what allows it to be a supportive program for them, is that we're not expecting them to be full-on experts already, because that's where the staff come in, right? They put 40 hours a week into these issues, right? And they have access to members, to people who can be surveyed. Going out and doing a survey like cold calls, it's really hard and can be kind of demoralizing if it doesn't go well. So that's why we kind of try to get them to do these types of projects, but their interests are wide-ranging. And when we do the training, we talk about women of color feminism, we talk about sexuality, we talk about all these other social justice issues, because to us, they're all kind of intersectional, right? Yeah.
How did you go about kind of recruiting these students, but then also having a selection process for them doing this work?
That's kind of the unfortunate part, is that there's not as many students going to college as there should be. And then if you reduce that by who's actually already a member of the organization, you do have to consider yourself a member of the organization in order to do a project. Like I said, Oscar was like the only exception, and I had already known him for years, so I was like, just come do it. And he ended up doing a research project with an urban garden program in San Francisco. And it's an organization he had already participated with for a few years. So a lot of them, they're already members. So they're already active in campaigns or other programs. East Yard has like a bicycling program. So yeah, they do like high school outreach, and also I think they just started a club at ELAC too. So they kind of are already around, and then we kind of just ask them. We don't do an application process. That's my whole like, GPAs only tell you so much. Don't believe in standardized tests, you know? So really, we already know them for months, if not years, and we just ask them to participate. We're like, would you be interested in doing this? And it's challenging because because we know them, we also know that sometimes they're working 1 or 2 jobs, you know? And so then we have that conversation with them of like, this is additional labor. Are you sure you want to do this? We don't want to overwhelm anybody. And I think it's a benefit to the program, because these are students that we don't just see as students of color, as numbers, as measures of success or whatever. These are people we care about. You know, we live in the same communities as these folks. And we acknowledge them as leaders, right? And so this is just about kind of one additional program, you know? But most of them are involved in a lot of other things. 2 of the researchers are actually board members, because the board of directors for East Yard is made up of community members. So 2 of them are also board members. Yeah.
Do you have to be physically living in the Eastern communities to be a part of this organization, or you could be a person of color from anywhere in Los Angeles County?
Yeah. We've had some questions around that. I think for right now, also again, because it's just the 2nd year, we're only looking at East Yard members specifically. And people who are East Yard members typically live in these communities. We've had, you know, professors ask, can I send my student? And we're actually like, no, that's actually the opposite of what we're trying to do. We're not trying to get people from the university and have to completely reintroduce this issue to them and completely give them the political education. That's why it matters that they're members, because they've been talking about these issues for years. So they know the issues, right? To have to start from scratch with someone, it can probably be more challenging.
You mentioned that it's really important to not have it be like demoralizing when your students are getting on the phone and going out and conducting a survey. And I think that's something that us as a body of educators, you know, we're encouraging our students to get on the phone and get out in the community and connect to real research and real data and the issue. And so I wondered if you have any sort of tips, if you could recommend those to us who are trying to get our students to do that and have it be a positive experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think also acknowledging that a lot of these students are from those communities, so they can survey their families if they want to. You know, some of the students did, some of them didn't. Again, the community piece, the community organization piece is so important. It is additional labor, you know, to have to go out to a community organization and become a member, kind of join them, learn about the issues. But it's what makes up the richness of this program, I think, because then it's not just based on even us as program staff to make people available to them. A lot of times it's the organizers, and things overlap really nicely. They recently defeated a rail yard campaign in West Long Beach, and so they were having a celebration. So the group that was doing a project in West Long Beach actually went to the celebration, which they would have gone to anyways, but they went with surveys and surveyed everybody at the celebration. So that's why the community piece is important. Did you have a question?
You started by talking about sort of your experience of doing this program and as an academic, and I was just wondering what's it like now that it's underway, and what's been the reception, or how is it reflected in your work as an academic?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that because I feel like people who know this part of me then ask me what my dissertation is on, and I'm like, oh, it's on Guatemalan Mayan communities in Los Angeles. They don't always see the connection. And so I've been thinking about it more, and I think the connection is around using community stories to build community power. A lot of my work around Mayan migrants and the second generation is about like their own epistemologies, how they create sites of memory for themselves as a community, not just about like, this is our culture, but also like a genocide happened. A genocide is what displaced us. A civil war, poverty, racism, those are all things that displaced us, you know? And so in the same way that they have their community histories, I think this is also about a community history and building community power. And then for me, doing this program has been a soul saver, you know? Like, I definitely fell into the whole, like, I'm gonna prioritize my doctoral training, right? All the pressure that I put on myself, that others put on me. And at some point, I was just like, what am I doing? I'm forgetting where I came from. Not just like culturally and racially, but I'm like, I came from organizing. I knew what it was like to be a high school student who was incredibly empowered and feeling like radically transformed after learning my own history, right? That first exposure to like ethnic studies and a relevant curriculum. I remember what that's like, and if I don't feel that way when I'm producing so much work, that's a problem. So that's when I started to think about, well, what do I want to do? My priority has always been to work with first-generation students of color, so I need to go out and do that. And so now seeing this come to fruition, seeing the opportunities that students get out of this, not just in the program, but beyond the program, has been extremely fulfilling. Yeah. That's also why I say, oh, I'll do it even if I don't get paid. But yeah. Any other questions?
So to what extent are the problems that these students are researching placed in some kind of historical context in their training or throughout the summer?
I think it varies depending on the project. I think Excite, for instance, because it's been known to be a polluter that was operating on expired permits for decades, has a much longer historical context than the folks who are going out to measure, to find oil infrastructure in West Long Beach, for instance. But I think one of the things that I want to work on more is kind of environmental justice as like a framework. I think because they're all in it, they don't always like, I feel like if I asked them what environmental justice is, I'm not sure what answers I would get. And to some extent, it's like, why do you have to force students into that framework if part of how they understand their work is different maybe? But there is a lot of space, at least in my opinion, around the curriculum, the training. Last year, for instance, we had no readings. We just kind of asked people to come. This year, we instituted like very light readings, but I'm hoping in the future we'll do a little bit more just to even see how like academics are thinking about this work and then compare it to their experience of actually living this issue. Does that make sense? Thank you.